The Natchez market was thick with dust and voices, the cries of merchants and the clamor of traders echoing off the brick walls. On that sweltering morning of 1847, a peculiar hush fell over the central square as a new arrival was led into the auction pen. She was small, barely 17, but every eye in the crowd froze upon seeing her. Her skin was a rich, deep mahogany that gleamed under the southern sun. Her eyes, impossibly large and dark, seemed to see straight into the hearts of all who dared stare. Her hair was a cascade of tightly coiled silk that shimmered like black gold, and her lips, full and unyielding, betrayed a hidden fire. She did not flinch, did not cry, did not bow. She simply stood, calm and untouchable, as if the world itself dared not breathe too loudly. Whispers raced among the traders. "She's from the plantations down by the Mississippi Delta." One said, "I've never seen a girl like that." "Never." Another muttered, "They say her beauty is unnatural, cursed even. No one knew her name, no one had dared to ask. And yet, everyone knew she held power. A quiet, terrifying kind of power that needed no weapons to enforce it. By the time the auctioneer lifted his gavel, dozens of wealthy men had already fallen silent, captivated not by fear, but by fascination. When the hammer finally came down, she was purchased by a man who called himself Mr. Whittington, a wealthy planter with a reputation for cruelty and a taste for the extraordinary. As she was led away, she turned her gaze briefly toward the crowd. A faint smile tugged at her lips, subtle and knowing. It was a smile that hinted at secrets the world was not ready to understand. The Whittington estate stretched along the river like a snake of brick and timber, fields of sugarcane and cotton rolling endlessly to the horizon. The young girl, whose name she would rarely speak aloud, was assigned quarters in the main house's servant wing, a place designed for efficiency, not comfort. Yet she did not seem dismayed. Instead, she moved through the rooms with a quiet grace, inspecting the surroundings with a careful eye that seemed to catalog every detail for reasons known only to her. Her first encounter with the household was with Mrs. Whittington, a woman of imposing size and brittle temper. "You are to serve my home as you are told, girl," she said, her voice sharp, slicing through the warm afternoon air. "And do not think your looks will save you from discipline." The girl nodded once, silently. Her eyes, however, flicked over Mrs. Whittington, registering her every weakness, the slight tremor in her hand, the tension in her jaw, the impatience masked as authority. It was a careful study, and it unnerved the mistress more than any words could. Later, she was introduced to the other slaves who served the household. Some sneered openly, envious of the attention she drew. Others kept their distance, wary of her calm, assured presence. One older woman whispered a warning, "Child, do not trust them. Beauty in Natchez is a dangerous gift." The girl smiled faintly at this, though she did not respond. She already understood the weight of her own appearance and the unspoken power it conferred. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall cypress trees lining the river, the Whittington family gathered for dinner. Every eye remained drawn to her. The newcomer. She served quietly, moving with fluid efficiency, but her glance caught the master's attention more than once. Mr. Whittington, a man who had owned countless slaves and yet prized them primarily for their usefulness, found himself unnervingly intrigued. It was not simply that she was beautiful, it was that she seemed untouchable, aware of her power in ways he had not encountered before. And in that first night, as the household settled into uneasy routines, she discovered the true nature of the Whittington home. Cruelty, secrecy, and hidden desires permeated every room. She listened behind doors, watched from shadows, and understood in a way that no one expected. She knew that to survive and perhaps thrive here, she would have to wield her beauty not as a shield, but as a weapon. As midnight fell and the house lay silent, she leaned against the cold wall of her small room and traced her fingers over the floorboards. Somewhere in the darkened halls, whispers traveled, some curious, some fearful, and she smiled again, faintly, to herself. She had come to Natchez a slave, but already She was becoming far more than anyone could imagine. She was a mystery, and mysteries, as the old market traders had said, were dangerous. The next morning, the girl rose before the first light crept across the Whittington estate. The air was thick with the scent of river mud and the faint sweetness of ripening sugar cane. She had slept little, not from fear or discomfort, but because she had already begun observing, calculating, and imagining. Every detail of the household mattered: who answered the doors, who kept secrets in their eyes, who was quick to anger, and who hid behind smiles. Her first task that day was tending to the master's study, polishing the dark oak furniture until it gleamed. She moved with quiet precision, aware that Mr. Whittington often observed from the doorway. She felt his eyes on her, measuring, testing, trying to gauge how much power she truly possessed. She let him watch, let him think he was in control. The first incident came mid-morning. One of the older housemaids, a woman named Della, tried to correct her abruptly. "Child, that corner is not clean. You missed the dust under the ledge." The girl glanced at her, her gaze steady and unnervingly direct. "I see it," she said simply, "and I will correct it." There was something in the calm assurance of her voice that made Della falter. The woman had been serving the Whittingtons for decades and prided herself on knowledge of the house and its routines, yet she found herself doubting her own eyes. The girl did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply moved to the corner, corrected it, and turned her attention to the next task. Della whispered a curse under her breath, which the girl heard clearly, though she made no reaction. By mid-afternoon, word of her presence had reached the fields. The enslaved workers whispered among themselves. "They say she's not like any girl I've seen," one murmured. "She walks and the air bends around her." Another shook his head. "Her eyes. It's like she can see inside you. I wouldn't cross her if I were you." The girl did not speak to them. She watched, listened, and smiled faintly to herself. Influence, she had already realized, could be drawn from a glance, a movement, a small word at just the right moment. Later, she encountered Mr. Whittington alone in the study. He pretended to be busy, sorting ledgers, but his eyes followed her as she dusted the shelves. She leaned closer to straighten a book, close enough that the faintest scent of her honey, earth, and something indefinably wild reached him. He swallowed hard and looked away. It was a small victory, but it thrilled her. She had already learned the first rule of survival in the Whittington household: appear compliant, yet never be invisible. By evening, the household gathered once more. Mrs. Whittington's sharp eyes darted to the girl repeatedly, her irritation growing with every subtle turn of the newcomer's head or calculated glance. The young girl did not flinch under the scrutiny. She had begun to understand the fragile hierarchy. Those who displayed power with cruelty could be undermined by patience, observation, and the silent assertion of presence. When the servants withdrew after dinner, she lingered in the shadowed hallways. Whittington men were seldom alone, and secrets thrived in the gaps between their boasts. She leaned against the wall, listening, cataloging, memorizing. One word from her lips, one subtle motion, could change the course of the day. Already, she had begun to experiment. A glance toward the master, a tilt of her head toward his sister, and suddenly the household's confidence in their dominance wavered, ever so slightly. Later, in the solitude of her small room, she traced the outline of her reflection in the wooden floorboards. She had been bought for 19 cents, an almost laughable sum for a girl whose beauty and presence might have fetched fortunes, but she had come to understand that her value was not in what she was sold for, but in what she could make others reveal: fear, envy, desire. She was no longer just a girl. She was a force, untested, mysterious, and poised for the moment when she would no longer simply survive, but command. As midnight approached, the mansion was quiet except for the low hum of the river outside. She had already chosen her allies and her observers, those who served quietly, unnoticed, and those who might be persuaded, or frightened, into revealing themselves. Her eyes gleamed with anticipation. For the first time, she allowed herself a faint, private smile. The auction had ended the day she arrived, But the real transaction, the one of influence, power, and secrets, was only just beginning. The Whittington family thought they owned her. They were mistaken. By dawn, the mansion was already alive with the stirrings of its occupants. The girl had risen before the sun, her movements quiet and precise, as though the house itself had grown accustomed to her presence. She began with the kitchens, guiding the staff with silent gestures and a soft authority that made them comply without question. As she moved, she noticed the subtle tension in the air. Mr. Whittington's older daughter, Lillian, entered the kitchen with a tray of bread, her delicate hands trembling slightly. "You are remarkably quick," she whispered, attempting to maintain an air of superiority. The girl's lips curved just enough to imply acknowledgement without subservience. Lillian stiffened, realizing that her position, fragile as it was, might be slipping. Outside, the fields were waking, the laborers preparing for the day's work. Whispers of the girl's beauty and poise had traveled quickly, and she found herself the subject of cautious glances. The overseer, a stout man with a habit of shouting over the workers, approached her to issue orders. He was met with an unflinching gaze and a calm nod. He expected fear or meekness. Instead, he found patience and subtle defiance. The moment lasted just long enough for him to hesitate, and that pause was all the girl needed. Back in the mansion, she was summoned to the study. Mr. Whittington sat behind his desk, ledgers spread before him. He looked up as she entered, attempting to mask a sense of unease. "I trust you slept well?" he asked, trying to inject casual authority into his tone. "I did," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. There was a weight in her gaze that he could not name, a quiet intelligence that unsettled him more than any defiance could. The master leaned back in his chair. "You will attend to my daughters today. Assist them in their studies and remain available for any household tasks." His voice carried the expectation of compliance. The girl inclined her head, acknowledging his words. But in her mind, she catalogued everything: the arrangement of the study, the habits of the daughters, the subtle frictions in the family dynamic. Each smile, each frown, each whispered word was a piece of the puzzle she was assembling. In the afternoon, she entered the drawing room to assist Miss Lillian with her embroidery. She observed the young woman's fingers faltering, the delicate tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the door as if seeking an escape. The girl's presence was unspoken but palpable. She did not correct the stitches immediately. She let Lillian struggle, then offered guidance with the lightest touch, so gentle that it felt as if the girl's hands were not guiding but merely suggesting. It was then that the youngest daughter, Maribel, entered. Her steps were hesitant, her gaze flitting between her sister and the girl. She was curious and cautious, sensing the subtle shift in power but unsure how to navigate it. The girl's eyes softened slightly, and Maribel found herself drawn to the quiet confidence radiating from her. A silent understanding passed between them. She would not be harmed, but she must learn to observe and respect. Meanwhile, Mr. Whittington grew increasingly uneasy. He had never encountered a slave who could command attention without speech, who could influence moods and actions with mere presence. The realization gnawed at him. She was not just beautiful, she was dangerous, and he could not yet determine why or how. Later, as evening fell and the household prepared for supper, the girl moved through the halls with the fluid grace of someone who belonged everywhere, yet answered to no one. She listened to the conversations around her, noting jealousies, ambitions, and the secrets whispered too softly to reach the master's ears. Every word was a clue, every glance an opportunity. When she reached the study one final time that evening, she found Mr. Whittington alone, staring out the window at the Natchez River. "You are unlike any servant I have known," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I cannot place you." She turned to face him fully, her voice calm and clear. "Perhaps you are not meant to." He started, taken aback by the conviction in her tone. He could sense that this girl, purchased for 19 cents, held within her something far greater than any price could measure. He did not yet know whether it was charm, cunning, or a mixture of both, but he felt the first stirrings of fear, a subtle, creeping unease that she was no ordinary slave and that his household would never be the same again. As the candles flickered in the study, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The auction had concluded the day she arrived, but the true test, the shaping of power, the gaining of influence, and the unveiling of secrets was only beginning. The mansion was her stage, and every whispered word, every cautious glance, every fleeting doubt was a thread in the web she was weaving. The morning air was thick with humidity, the Natchez sun climbing lazily over the river and the fields beyond. By the time the household stirred, the girl had already moved through every room she was assigned to, noting every habit, every slip, every quiet tension between the family members. She had learned the rhythm of the household, and she knew where patience would gain her favor and where caution was required. Miss Lillian was the first to confront the day. She had recovered some composure overnight but was acutely aware of the girl's presence. At breakfast, she avoided her gaze as best she could, but the girl's calm observation made it impossible to hide. Every bite of bread, every sip of tea was measured and noticed. The girl's eyes were gentle but unwavering, as if reading thoughts no one else could see. Lillian's jealousy simmered, a slow-burning frustration that made her fingertips curl around her fork. Meanwhile, Maribel, the youngest, lingered near the kitchen door, her curiosity barely contained. The girl noticed her hesitation and smiled faintly, a gesture so subtle it could have been mistaken for a shadow. Maribel's shoulders relaxed, and she followed silently as the girl moved through the hallways, leading her in small, seemingly inconsequential tasks, guiding her without giving commands. The master, Mr. Whittington, paced his study. He had spent a restless night pondering the girl's inexplicable hold over his daughters and, more alarmingly, over the household itself. She was efficient, intelligent, and calm beyond her years. But there was an aura of quiet power, a presence that refused to bow fully to authority, and it unnerved him. He called for her mid-morning, summoning her to the study. She entered with the same composed grace, curtsying just slightly, not out of fear but out of learned decorum. "You are unlike any servant I have known," he said, a faint tremor betraying his effort to appear commanding. "I need to know that you understand your place." "I understand my place," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "But I am also a person, sir. I am capable of thought, of observation, and of action." Her words were not a challenge, but a quiet declaration. The master felt a pang of unease. There was no impertinence, only truth, and the honesty in her tone gave it weight. He found himself momentarily at a loss. Leaving the study, the girl made her way to the nursery, where Lillian and Maribel's younger cousins played. She observed their games, their whispered secrets, and the subtle power struggles among them. It was all a tapestry of family dynamics, and she catalogued every piece, every fault, every hidden strength. By afternoon, she had woven herself invisibly into the household's fabric, a presence felt but seldom fully seen. As the day wore on, tension began to mount among the daughters. Lillian's irritation grew with every quiet act of competence the girl displayed, while Maribel's fascination transformed into admiration. Lillian's whispered complaints to her mother went largely unheard, drowned out by the soft, unassuming efficiency of the girl's work. In the afternoon, a minor mishap occurred. A servant carrying a tray of tea slipped near the grand staircase, spilling the hot liquid across the polished floor. The girl reacted immediately, steadying the tray with precise hands and preventing further disaster. The mistress of the house, who had been standing nearby, caught sight of her skill and nodded with thinly veiled approval. Lillian, meanwhile, looked away, cheeks burning with embarrassment. That evening, as the household gathered for supper, the girl moved through the dining room, serving with quiet precision. Her movements were measured, deliberate, and entirely without error. Each placement of a plate, each pour of wine, each discreet gesture reinforced her silent authority. The master watched from the head of the table, tension knotting his shoulders. He recognized the truth he had been trying to deny. This girl, purchased for mere cents, held more influence over the household than he had yet been willing to admit. After the meal, when the family had retired to the drawing room, the girl lingered at the threshold. She observed the dynamics, the sharp whispers of jealousy between the sisters, the subtle concern in the mother's eyes, and the simmering frustration of the master. Her understanding of the household's inner workings was now complete. Sitting by the fireplace, the master's wife commented on the girl's appearance, praising her hands for their skill and her posture for its elegance. Lillian could not contain herself any longer. "She seems too perfect," she muttered, voice barely audible. The girl's ears caught the comment, though her expression remained serene. Inwardly, she catalogued it as another thread, another opportunity. She smiled faintly, knowing that tomorrow, the household would bend subtly to her quiet will, even without anyone fully understanding how it had happened. As the candles flickered low that night, the girl retreated to her small quarters. She allowed herself a quiet smile, reflecting on the day's subtle victories. She was not yet free, not yet in control, but she was learning, observing, and quietly shaping the household around her. And in her mind, she already knew that the master had no idea what had truly arrived in Natchez, or the ripple effects it would unleash over the days, weeks, and months to come. The morning in Natchez was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that hangs heavy over a household when tension simmers just below the surface. The girl had risen early, as was her custom, moving through the corridors with silent grace. Every sound of her slippers on the wooden floors was calculated, measured, purposeful. She did not hurry. She did not stumble. She was aware that her presence alone was enough to set hearts racing or nerves fraying. By the time the mistress, Mrs. Whitmore, appeared in the hallway, the girl had already attended to the breakfast arrangements, ensured the younger children were dressed and fed, and noted every detail of the household's morning routines. Her eyes, alert and perceptive, missed nothing. The slight dark circles under Lillian's eyes, the nervous tapping of Maribel's fingers, even the master's clenched jaw as he read his morning letters. When Mrs. Whitmore approached, the girl inclined her head politely. "Good morning, ma'am," she said softly, her tone laced with that quiet authority which had become impossible to ignore. "Good morning," the mistress replied, a note of restrained admiration in her voice, though her gaze lingered with a curious mixture of suspicion and wonder. "I see everything is in order." The girl's faint smile acknowledged the compliment. "Yes, ma'am. I try to anticipate the day's needs before they arrive." While the girls, Lillian and Maribel, watched from the staircase, the household began to feel the subtle shift in power that had been forming quietly since the girl's arrival. Lillian's irritation burned with every move the girl made. She saw the way her father paused mid-letter to watch the girl serve breakfast, how her mother's eyes softened at the sight of her care and efficiency, and most of all, how her sister Maribel's admiration grew into something deeper, something Lillian could not comprehend. After breakfast, the girl led Maribel to the garden under the guise of fetching fresh herbs. Yet this excursion was not merely for chores, it was an opportunity for observation, for learning the unspoken dynamics of the household beyond the walls of the main house. She noticed how the servants moved quietly, eyes downcast, but constantly watching her. She noticed the subtle gestures, the whispers, and the glances that betrayed the shifting loyalties in the kitchen and quarters. By noon, she had catalogued every potential ally and every possible threat. Meanwhile, Lillian, left to her own devices, had grown restless and suspicious. She whispered bitterly to herself, her fingers twisting in her napkin. "She's too clever, too perfect. How can a slave be this cunning?" The words slipped into the air like smoke, yet the girl, always present even when unseen, had already noted the sentiment. By the afternoon, the master summoned the girl once again. He sat in his study, letters spread across the desk, a frown etched deeply into his face. "You have been here less than a week," he began, his tone carrying an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "And yet, there is a calm efficiency about you that I have not seen in any other servant." The girl's eyes met his without fear. "Thank you, sir," she said simply. "I believe that respect and attention to duty create a household where all can function smoothly." "I buy." He frowned, sensing the subtle implication beneath her words. They were not merely a statement of service, they were a quiet assertion of intellect and observation. A power he had not anticipated in someone who, by his assumptions, should be entirely dependent and submissive. Later, the girl moved to the nursery where the children played, quietly organizing games and interactions so that harmony, or at least order, prevailed. She did not command. She guided. Her presence shaped the environment without overt authority, and yet everyone in the room obeyed the rhythm she set. Lillian entered briefly, her face drawn tight with jealousy, watching as her sister Maribel laughed openly at a joke the girl had orchestrated. The master's wife noticed the tension, her eyes sharp but not accusatory. "She is remarkable," Mrs. Whitmore murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "I have never seen a servant command attention without command, nor inspire obedience without force." Even the master could not hide the unease that prickled along his spine. In the silence of the late afternoon, he found himself studying the girl from across the hall. He noted the poised tilt of her head, the quiet confidence in her gaze, the way she moved as if she belonged not only to the household but also above it. The thought unsettled him more than he could articulate. As evening fell, the girl prepared the household for supper, carefully noting the dynamics at play where resentment lingered, where loyalty existed, and where subtle power struggles simmered. Lillian's anger had not abated. It had festered into a quiet, simmering storm, while Maribel's admiration had grown into something almost reverent. The master and mistress, each wrestling with their own fascination and unease, were caught in the invisible orbit the girl had created. By candlelight, as the family gathered for the evening meal, it became increasingly clear. She was no ordinary slave, no simple servant to be ordered and dismissed. She had observed, adapted, and quietly asserted a presence that could not be ignored. And though no one at the table yet spoke openly about it, an unspoken truth permeated the room. The girl, bought for mere pennies, was rapidly becoming the invisible hand that controlled the household's rhythm and, perhaps, its fate. As the candles flickered low, the girl lingered by the fireplace after the others had retired, reflecting on the day's subtle triumphs. She allowed herself a faint smile. Influence was not taken. It was observed, earned, and quietly enacted. And in this household, she had begun the process of bending reality itself to her will, one careful, deliberate step at a time. The morning light in Natchez crept into the house with a deceptive softness, gilding the edges of curtains and casting long shadows across the polished floors. It should have been a day like any other. But beneath the stillness, a subtle tension pulsed through the household. The girl, as usual, had risen first, moving through the rooms with quiet precision, her eyes noting every detail, the way the master's coat lay slightly askew, the fold of a letter still damp from the inkwell, the children's unsettled expressions. She paused in the hallway outside the master's study, listening. His voice, low and deliberate, drifted through the door. "And I cannot allow it to continue. She cannot." The rest was muffled, but the hint of frustration was unmistakable. She stepped inside with her customary quiet grace. "Sir," she said, her voice even, calm, yet carrying a subtle authority. The master looked up, startled, as though her mere presence had punctured a private thought. "Yes?" His tone was measured, but there was an edge of uncertainty. "I can assist, if you wish. Perhaps there is a way to address the matter without discord." Her words were soft, but the subtext was clear. She had observed, understood, and already formulated a solution. The master leaned back, studying her. He had begun to notice the pattern of her influence, subtle but undeniable. "You have a way of knowing things before I say them." "I observe, sir, that is all." Her eyes met his directly, unwavering, and he felt a strange mixture of admiration and unease. Outside, in the garden, Maribel lingered near the herb beds. She had followed the girl, curious about the subtle power she seemed to wield over the household. "Why does he listen to you?" she asked, almost reverently. "He never listens to anyone." The girl's lips curved slightly. "Because I do not ask him to listen. I show him the path without forcing him to step upon it." Maribel tilted her head, pondering this quietly, a sense of awe and confusion intertwining. Inside the main hall, Lillian moved like a shadow, her anger simmering with every glance she cast at the girl. Today, she had overheard a servant whispering about the girl's arrangements for the morning. "She commands without command," Lillian muttered, bitterness threading her voice. It is unnatural. She paced the corridor, trying to grasp the growing influence that seemed to emanate from the girl. By midday, the girl had begun her rounds, guiding interactions and subtly redirecting conflicts before they even ignited. A small quarrel between the children was diffused with a carefully placed suggestion. A dispute among the kitchen staff ended quietly with her intervention, and each time, the master and mistress observed her from afar, their curiosity mingled with concern. As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, the first real challenge of the day arrived. A visiting trader, recently arrived from New Orleans, stepped into the drawing room. He was a man accustomed to control, accustomed to the unquestioned authority of wealth and status. But he had not accounted for the presence of the girl. "Good afternoon," the trader said, offering a smile that expected deference. "I understand you have the most remarkable young woman in your employ. May I see her?" The master hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. The girl, standing silently by the doorway, met the trader's gaze. Her stance was confident, calm, unyielding. She did not move forward, yet somehow the room's attention, including the master's, centered on her. The trader cleared his throat. "I have heard of her beauty, her intelligence. I would like to speak with her, perhaps engage her services for a demonstration." The girl raised a hand slightly, a gesture subtle yet commanding. "Sir, if it pleases you, I can demonstrate nothing beyond what is required here. My duty is to this household, not to display myself as an object of admiration." A murmur ran through the room. The master's jaw tightened, the trader blinked in surprise, and even Maribel, who had been observing from the stairs, gasped softly. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth, rage and disbelief battling within her. "Very well," the trader said, trying to regain control. "But I hope you understand people will notice talent such as yours." "I understand," the girl replied simply, her calm unwavering. Her words were not defiance. They were a clear assertion of autonomy that unsettled all who heard them. By evening, the household had shifted subtly but undeniably. The girl's quiet authority had expanded, her influence now acknowledged even by outsiders. The master, who had once seen her merely as a servant, began to feel an unease that bordered on reverence. The mistress, still cautious but increasingly curious, noted the subtle power the girl wielded, and Lillian's simmering jealousy began to harden into a more dangerous form of resentment. As night fell and the candles were lit, the girl moved through the house, her presence a quiet pulse in the heart of the household. She had not raised her voice, nor demanded obedience, yet every mind in the house had adjusted to her orbit. Maribel followed her to the nursery, whispering softly, "How do you do it? How do you command without commanding?" The girl's gaze softened. Observation, understanding, and patience. Power is not taken, it is recognized. And here, it is recognized by all, even if silently. In the shadows of the candlelight, she paused at the window, looking out over the city of Natchez. Somewhere in the night, voices whispered of her presence, of the strange combination of beauty, intelligence, and quiet authority. And the girl knew, with the clarity that had become her constant companion, that her journey of influence had only just begun. The household slept uneasily that night, each person haunted in some small way by the undeniable force the girl had become. And outside, the streets of Natchez were quiet, unaware of the storm of subtle power gathering in a single, remarkable figure who had already begun to bend fate to her will. The morning in Natchez arrived heavy with humidity, the sun struggling through a sky that threatened rain. The girl was already moving through the household, her steps precise and deliberate. Her influence had become undeniable. Even the master, who had once dismissed her as merely beautiful, now consulted her subtly, often without realizing he was doing so. Today, however, she faced a test unlike any before. Lillian, still simmering with jealousy, had planned a confrontation that could either break the girl's composure or reveal the full extent of her cunning. "You cannot let her control everything," Lillian hissed to the mistress in the parlor. "I will not stand aside while she rearranges the household to suit herself." The mistress, cautious and curious, tried to mediate. "Lillian, calm yourself. She has done nothing wrong, only shown capability. There is no harm in order and efficiency. Lillian's eyes narrowed. Efficiency? She steals attention, admiration, influence. She turns the master's mind away from what is proper, and even you watch it with fascination. It is unnatural. Meanwhile, the girl moved to the kitchen, quietly orchestrating preparations for the midday meal. She noticed subtle tensions among the servants' disputes that had begun to fester. A few whispered rumors of her abilities had emboldened some and unsettled others. Her calm authority restored the fragile order effortlessly, each suggestion met without question, each task completed before complaint could arise. Then the master's footsteps echoed behind her. "I hear a commotion," he said, voice taut. "What is happening here?" The girl did not startle. She turned, meeting his gaze with the same composed expression that had become her signature. "Sir, only minor disagreements. I have arranged them. There is no further issue." He hesitated, studying her. "You continue to manage the household without direct orders?" "Yes, sir," she replied, "only to ensure peace and efficiency. No one suffers from my actions, only the household benefits." A flash of something indecipherable passed over his face, respect, uncertainty, and a trace of awe. He nodded slowly and walked away, leaving her to her tasks. Lillian, however, would not be so easily placated. She intercepted the girl near the garden, where the children had been playing quietly under the girl's watchful eye. "You think you are clever," she spat, "but this house does not belong to you. You are nothing but a slave, and I will remind everyone of that." The girl's expression did not change. She stepped closer, her posture unwavering. "I am exactly what I am. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet here I stand, and you choose to speak against what is evident." "You dare speak to me like this?" Lillian hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I speak truth," the girl said, calm and precise. "If that is an affront, then so be it. But know this. It is not I who controls the household. It is the acknowledgement of ability and integrity. I do not take power. It is recognized in me." Lillian's hands trembled, and for a moment, the girl saw fear flash across her face. The once confident heiress of the household was shaken by the certainty of the girl's presence. From a distance, Maribel watched, her curiosity now entwined with admiration. "How do you stand so firm?" she whispered. "Observation, patience, and knowing the hearts of those around you," the girl replied softly. "Power is never seized, it is reflected back to the one who embodies it." The confrontation ended without further words. Lillian retreated, fuming, yet defeated, aware that her attempts to intimidate had failed. And in the quiet that followed, the girl returned to her children, her movements smooth and calm, unshaken. As evening fell, the household was tense but orderly. The master lingered in the study, glancing frequently at the girl, who moved silently through the corridors, checking on tasks and ensuring everything ran seamlessly. The power she wielded was subtle, but absolute. Outside, Natchez settled into a quiet night. Yet within the walls of the household, a storm of whispered respect and barely suppressed envy brewed. The girl had become more than a servant. She was a force, a presence whose influence would continue to ripple through the household, reshaping relationships, allegiances, and ambitions. And somewhere in the quiet, Lillian plotted her next move, unaware that the girl already anticipated each thought, each impulse, each attempt to undermine her. For the first time in the household's long history, no one could predict what would happen next, except the girl herself. By midnight, the house lay in uneasy slumber. Candles flickered in the hallways, and shadows danced along the walls. The girl paused at the window once more, looking out over the city of Natchez, sensing the shifting currents of power and influence. A smile played at her lips, subtle yet full of quiet promise. She knew that her story, already whispered in awe by servants, feared by the mistress, and watched with perplexed admiration by the master, was far from over. And the city, oblivious to the quiet force at work within one household, would soon feel the ripples of her presence in ways that no one could yet imagine. The girl's power, subtle yet undeniable, was just beginning to shape her destiny and the destinies of all around her. The morning fog clung to Natchez like a damp veil, muting the city's usual clamor and giving the streets an eerie calm. Within the household, however, a storm brewed that no mist could obscure. Whispers of the girl's growing influence had begun to slip beyond the walls, reaching ears she had never personally addressed. Merchants, visitors, and even neighboring planters began to speak of the remarkable slave who moved with the grace of a queen and the cunning of a strategist. The master paced in his study, frowning. Though he could not deny her efficiency, there was a subtle, insidious unease that crept into his thoughts. His authority, once unquestioned, now felt porous. Even the mistress, who had long scorned the girl's presence, could not help but acknowledge her skill in running the household. Lillian, meanwhile, had recovered from her previous humiliation and sought counsel from the most sympathetic servants. "We must find a way to reveal her true nature," she whispered, leaning close to one of the older housemaids. "Everyone must see that beneath her beauty lies cunning danger. If the master falls for her, we all will suffer." The housemaid nodded but hesitated. "She is clever, Miss Lillian. I have watched her, and she anticipates every move, every word. She is untouchable." "Untouchable?" Lillian's voice rose, trembling with frustration. "Every person can be undermined. We will find the crack in her armor, and when we do, she will regret ever crossing me." Across the hallway, the girl moved quietly, attending to the children. She sensed the tension, the plotting, and a smile tugged at her lips. Her awareness was not merely intuition, it was years of careful observation, noting desires, fears, and ambitions. She had come to understand that influence was never about brute control. It was about guiding perceptions, letting others believe they acted of their own accord, while she subtly directed the flow. That afternoon, the master summoned her to the study. The servants whispered as she entered, noting the rare seriousness in his demeanor. "Sit," he said, motioning to a chair opposite him. "There are matters we must discuss." She complied, calm and poised, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I hear rumors," he began slowly. "Rumors about you. That you command attention, manipulate situations. That people speak of you with a mixture of fear and admiration." She inclined her head slightly. "Rumors are only words, sir. Only actions reveal truth." He leaned back, conflicted. "Yet your actions, they have power. I cannot deny that, and I cannot control the way others respond to you." "I do not seek to control, sir," she replied softly. "I seek only to fulfill what is required, to maintain order and ensure peace. Influence comes as a consequence of responsibility, not ambition." He stared at her, searching for any hint of deceit, any flicker of ulterior motive. Finding none, he exhaled slowly. "Then, you admit that all this is calculated?" "All life is a series of calculations, sir," she said evenly. "Even your judgments, even your authority, they rely on assessment, on observation, on choice. I simply recognize patterns as they emerge and act accordingly." Outside, Lillian watched from the parlor window, anger simmering into fury. The girl had not only survived scrutiny, she had framed it as competence, elegance, and unavoidable necessity. Lillian's schemes, subtle as they had been, faltered against an opponent whose intellect and composure were unmatched. By evening, the household was quiet, but the undercurrent of tension remained. The girl moved through the rooms silently, noting expressions, overhearing snippets of conversations, and cataloging the intentions of all who dwelled under that roof. She had learned that influence could be wielded subtly, invisibly, yet with devastating effect. In the courtyard, the master lingered, troubled. He had always prided himself on discernment, yet this girl, this presence within his household, had begun to shape his thoughts in ways he could not fully understand. Admiration, respect, subtle fear all intertwined with a growing dependency on her guidance. The night deepened, and as shadows stretched across the city of Natchez, the girl paused at the window. She looked out at the quiet streets, her mind already planning the next day, the next move, the next ripple of influence. Somewhere, beyond the walls, the city whispered of her beauty, her intellect, her uncanny presence. Few knew her name, fewer still could comprehend the force she had become. And as the candlelight flickered across her composed face, it was clear. The household, and perhaps Natchez itself, would never be the same again. Her power was subtle, invisible, and growing, and those who underestimated her would soon learn that the most dangerous force is one that no one sees coming.